Spending $638,000 of stolen production budget on exactly 2 high-end mattresses suggests a very specific set of priorities for a science fiction director. Tuesday, June 30th, 2026, has arrived with data center bans, artificial intelligence coding mandates, and the legal definition of presidential firing power. Lambert Wallingham presents this edition of The Daily Shear as the federal courts redraw the limits of municipal surveillance, cell phone tracking, and the retail price of premium gasoline. The physical landscape of Central Texas continues to undergo a series of aggressive adjustments where the demands of global technology are meeting the very finite boundaries of local utilities and public space. The City Council of San Marcos has voted to enact a total ban on new data center developments, the first Texas municipality to take this restrictive stance against digital infrastructure expansion. This decision responds to the heavy consumption of water and power resources after data center operators ignored utility transparency surveys and nearby Hays County implemented a temporary moratorium. The ban tests local municipal authority against the technology-focused economic goals of state leadership. Local officials apparently decided that residential utility stability is more urgent than hosting warehouses of humming servers. To offset the loss of its iconic Capitol Plaza flagship location, demolished for the widening of Interstate 35, the fast food chain P. Terry's is expanding late-night hours. 6 Central Texas locations will transition to 24-hour service, transforming a prominent casualty of state highway expansion into a regional overnight logistics play. Founder Patrick Terry had previously lamented losing the mid-century modern flagship building. Late-night commuters will now have more burger options, though they will have to navigate a significantly larger construction corridor to access them. The City of Austin is partnering with autonomous vehicle operator Waymo to feed real-time sensor data from self-driving fleets directly to municipal repair crews. Waymo vehicles will log road conditions and automatically flag potholes as they navigate city streets, turning robotaxis into maintenance assets. This program represents a rare moment of cooperation with a commercial sector that frequently faces criticism for traffic blockages. By outsourcing road inspections to automated algorithms, city managers hope to accelerate repair timelines without deploying human inspection teams. One hopes the algorithms do not eventually decide that road decay is the only effective speed deterrent. A 10-year investigation into drowning fatalities at Austin's Lady Bird Lake has prompted municipal officials to replace non-functioning surveillance cameras and initiate a broader safety review. The inquiry examined 30 drowning deaths over the past decade, showing a persistent link to late-night intoxication near the Rainey Street Entertainment District. While investigators found no evidence supporting local rumors of a serial killer, the accidental deaths forced the city to address surveillance gaps. Beyond immediate camera upgrades, safety advocates are exploring barriers and lighting to deter impaired patrons from the water. Apparently, administrative blind spots are only addressed once. The statistics become impossible to ignore. In a local development update, the viral search across the Texas Hill Country has ended with the safe return of Gracie, the giraffe, to the Cedar Hollow Ranch. The multi-day search was heavily complicated by amateur trackers, false sightings, and a flood of artificial intelligence-generated reports claiming she was captured hours before she actually was. Ranch officials successfully loaded her onto a transport trailer after finding her in a nearby wooded area. The incident highlights the unique challenges of modern agricultural management, where digital misinformation spreads faster than a physical containment team. As capital markets continue to navigate the friction between physical supply chains and speculative technology, corporate and political leaders are attempting to force reality to match their projections. The Chief Executive Officer of Grindr, George Arison, has announced a mandate requiring the dating platform's software development to transition toward artificial intelligence. Arison stated in a recent media appearance that he simply imposed the technology on his engineering staff, with the ultimate goal of having all of their code written by artificial intelligence. This aggressive directive reflects a growing corporate fatigue with human software engineering budgets. While Labor advocates warn that automated coding threatens security and software quality, the top-down approach demonstrates a corporate willingness to bypass developer resistance in pursuit of margin expansion. Arison's administrative efficiency appears to depend on software code being entirely free of human errors, or at least human developers who expect to be paid. A coalition of Democratic attorneys general representing 25 states has sued the federal government over newly implemented rules tying Medicaid eligibility to strict work requirements. The legal challenge argues that the directive is an unlawful overreach that will strip healthcare access from millions of low-income families and place severe administrative burdens on state agencies. This lawsuit represents a major institutional clash as the federal government seeks to curb entitlement spending. Opponents contend the work requirements ignore the realities of the gig economy and systemic employment barriers, while conservative advocates defend the policy as a vital fiscal measure. It is a classic bureaucratic compromise where public health is managed by the rigorous filing of paperwork. To combat a severe global memory shortage, South Korean technology giants Samsung Electronics and SK Hynix have committed over $550 billion to expand semiconductor manufacturing capacity. This colossal capital commitment is part of a broader $880 billion national artificial intelligence and chip investment plan. The expansion comes immediately after hardware manufacturers raised retail prices on consumer electronics, citing a severe shortage driven by the tech sector's insatiable demand for hardware. By investing $500 billion locally, South Korea hopes to ease the Ram-Agedon bottleneck. Even the most advanced virtual systems require a highly expensive foundation of purified sand. President Trump has demanded that retail gas stations immediately cut fuel prices to approximately $2.50 per gallon, pointing to falling global crude oil futures. The national average at the pump remains elevated at $3.85, a discrepancy the president blamed on retail price gouging rather than standard lag times in distribution networks. This rhetorical escalation follows volatile price spikes driven by military conflicts in the Persian Gulf. While energy analysts note that retail prices rarely fall in lockstep with volatile futures due to inventory costs, the administration is using public pressure and threat of federal scrutiny to force concessions from retail distributors. It appears the executive branch is attempting to manage inflation by commanding the thermometer to show a different temperature. In a financial market update, the speculative frenzy surrounding SpaceX shares has experienced a historic correction, with the company's estimated market valuation shrinking by more than $811 billion. This dramatic decline follows a highly volatile period of retail-driven investor euphoria, which previously saw the company shed $400 billion in a single day. Financial analysts suggest that the cooling enthusiasm reflects a broader systemic shift, as investors increasingly demand concrete commercial returns rather than long-term strategic projections in the privatized space sector. Even when a business model is designed to escape Earth's gravity, its valuation remains bound to interest rates. On the national and cultural stages, the rules governing authority and accountability are being redrawn, sometimes with sweeping constitutional changes and sometimes with the purchase of premium betting. The United States Supreme Court has issued 2 landmark rulings that expand presidential authority over the federal bureaucracy, overturning a 91-year-old precedent that protected independent agencies from political control. In a 6-3 decision in Trump versus Slaughter, the court ruled that the heads of independent commissions, like the Federal Trade Commission, can be fired at will by the president, ending the historical 4-cause protections established in 1935. However, in a companion 5-4 ruling in Trump versus Cook, the court carved out a major exception for the Federal Reserve. Chief Justice John Roberts joined the Liberal minority to rule that the president does not have unilateral authority to fire Federal Reserve governors like Lisa Cook without cause. Dissenters in the Cook case argued this exception leaves the central bank unaccountable to the Constitution, creating a system where the only independent entity left in Washington is the central bank's ledger. The Supreme Court has delivered a major setback to the Trump administration and the Republican National Committee, ruling that state laws allowing mail-in ballots to be counted after Election Day are constitutional. The 6-3 decision upholds election procedures in 18 states that accept ballots arriving within a specified grace period, provided they are postmarked on or before Election Day. The ruling arose from a challenge to a Mississippi law that allowed a 5-day post-election window. The court's decision represents a rare defeat for efforts to restrict voting windows, protecting the status quo for millions of mail-in voters, preserving the established process for millions of voters who trust the Postal Service to outrun the calendar, in a significant victory for digital privacy advocates. The Supreme Court has ruled that law enforcement agencies must secure standard probable cause warrants to execute geofence searches. The ruling limits the government's ability to sweep up mass location data from cellular providers to identify cell phones active near crime scenes, declaring that the bulk collection of personal location history is protected by constitutional privacy rights. The decision curtails an increasingly popular law enforcement technique that critics argued amounted to dragnet surveillance of innocent bystanders. By subjecting geofence queries to strict judicial review, the court has established a critical legal boundary on the state's usage of digital footprints. The ruling is a setback for law enforcement agencies accustomed to using local cell towers as automated eyewitnesses. The Alaska Supreme Court has affirmed a lower court ruling allowing a challenger named Daniel J. Sullivan, Jr. to run in the state's Republican primary for the United States Senate, where he will compete directly against incumbent Senator Dan Sullivan. State election officials had previously disqualified the challenger, arguing his campaign was a fraudulent attempt to confuse voters and split the vote. The state's High Court rejected that argument, ruling that the Division of Elections had abused its discretion by inventing a good faith test with no basis in state or federal law. The decision forces officials to design a ballot that complies with design laws while somehow distinguishing a retired elementary school teacher from a sitting senator, proving once again that election administration is primarily an exercise in layout design. Hollywood writer and director Carl Rinsch has been sentenced to 30 months in federal prison after being convicted of defrauding Netflix out of $11 million. Rinsch had requested the funds to complete a science fiction series called White Horse, but prosecutors proved he instead diverted the money into a personal account to fund a lavish lifestyle. The trial revealed that Rinsch spent the stolen funds on luxury cars, watches, designer clothing, and $638,000 on exactly 2 high-end mattresses. While high-profile supporters, including actor Keanu Reeves, petitioned the court for leniency, the judge's sentence emphasizes the legal risks of treating streaming development budgets as personal venture capital. It appears that while Netflix is usually content to spend millions of dollars on projects that go nowhere, they draw the line when the production budget is used to optimize the director's sleep quality. I have been thinking about those 2 $638,000 mattresses purchased by Carl Rinsch. It is an extraordinary amount of money to spend on sleep, but perhaps he simply understood, before the rest of us, that the physical world is becoming increasingly uncomfortable. Consider the city of San Marcos banning data centers because there is not enough water to cool them, or the South Korean tech sector spending $550 billion to resolve a memory shortage that the chief executive of Grindr wants to solve by firing his entire engineering staff. Even the Supreme Court spent its week deciding that a president can fire the head of the Federal Trade Commission at will, but cannot touch the Federal Reserve, creating a system where the only independent entity left in Washington is the central bank's ledger. When the choice is between navigating a widened Interstate 35 to find a 24-hour hamburger or watching 2 political candidates named Dan Sullivan compete for the same Senate seat, a highly expensive mattress begins to look less like a fraud and more like a sensible infrastructure investment. If the code is going to be written by models and the roads are going to be scanned by robotaxis, the least we can do is ensure that whoever is left to watch the machinery decay is comfortable while doing so. I only hope those mattresses are firm enough to support the weight of the upcoming administrative paperwork. The machinery of state and commerce continues to run on the assumption that if you ignore a consequence long enough, it will eventually become someone else's budget item. Until then, the records remain clean, the paperwork is filed, and the grass is still green on the other side of the fence. This is Lambert Woollingham, closing this edition of the Daily Shear from a region currently trying to decide if it prefers data centres or drinking water. If anyone has seen a giraffe or an extra candidate named Dan Sullivan, please direct them to the nearest 24-hour burger stand. The day has been shorn until tomorrow.